Welcome, everyone. I'm Greg Stanley. I'm here with Wes Warren. We like to talk about something that comes up quite a bit in consulting. You know, we see doctors struggling for profit. Dentistry isn't the most profitable of all aspects of healthcare. It's got a little bit slimmer margins. Not bad, but you have to keep an eye on it or it real quickly gets away from you. The question I'm often asked is, to make a profit or a better profit, do I need to spend less or do I need to earn more? Wes, can you comment on that?
Yeah, so we get this question and kind of the spending less revolves usually around labs and supplies, first of all, and then of course staff costs. Those are the things that seem to sometimes marketing, we'll throw that in there. Those are the areas that seem to be areas where doctors can easily control the spending. If those get out of whack, reining those back in absolutely can make a difference. And then of course there's the making more side, like you said. So this would be things like raising your fees, getting out of network, and actually getting better case acceptance, being more efficient, and producing more per month. Those are the main areas. And I would say that one thing that Greg, you and I talk about a lot is staff costs. Staff costs have changed a lot over the last few years, but we still see the same ranges, believe it or not. We're going to see staff costs in larger practices be near 30%. Some of the bigger practices, it could be 31, 32%. If you're in a high wage area, yeah, you could be in the low 30s, but we're talking 31, 32 max. And then kind of down to 30 or 26. So say 26 to 31 is what we see. And if you ought to know your area, if you're in an area where wages are high, yeah, I would expect that number to be closer to 30. If you're in an area that wages are low, it can be 26. But that's the range. In smaller practices, it can be way better than that. We can see it at 25, 24, 23, 22% in smaller practices. So
when you get a doctor in their prime, the prime of life, and they're doing big cases and it's kind of drifted into big cases only, there's a tendency that staff numbers don't increase with the growth of the practice. And so you'll see a practice, we've seen people paying 20% for staff. I've seen that, but it's an opportunity that you get once in a lifetime and then kind of goes away.
Yeah, I've seen it at 15%.
Oh,
well, yeah, that's the lowest I've seen in a big practice.
Right.
Practice doing several, I think it was 300,000-400,000 a month. Yes, so it was pretty nice setup there. That's kind of a guideline. Obviously, there all these rules and rules of thumb are meant to be broken. That give you a good rough estimate of where you should be. Now, if you're outside of that, if your staff costs rise quite frequently, where you have months where it's 36%, 37%, then it's back down to 30, 31. That would indicate a couple things to me. So one would be, yeah, are we overstaffed? Are people abusing overtime? That can happen. So as you manage the overtime situation a little better, you can see that number drift way up, or if you get it back in line, get right back in shape. But typically speaking, we have a real hard time letting go of team members. Greg, this whole idea that, yeah, we have 5 people working here, our staff costs a little out of line, so we're just going to let somebody go.
Oh,
Can you comment on that? What that looks like, the long-term ramifications of that type of thinking.
yeah. What happens is you let somebody go or somebody quits, whatever. And all of a sudden you had 7 people, now you have 6, or 10, and now you have 9. And everybody says, oh, don't bring some stranger in here that doesn't know what they're doing. Let's just all pull together and do the work. And what happens, whether you realize it or not, you set the practice on a course to shrink by some percentage. I mean, the gross gets smaller, and you'll wish you would have replaced that person, paid the price to train them up and so forth. Wes, let's talk about a couple things that are kind of right now in the dental news. When I started out, Dental Economics was advertising that a doctor, a general practitioner will spend 24% of their gross on staff. Within 20 years, it was 26%. And after the pandemic, it looks like it might even be higher. So, you're talking about 30, 31%. The doctor who's at those levels will be very fortunate if 3 or 4% of that is coming by paying bonus. In other words, part of the staff cost and bonus, that at least ensures you're getting something back for that forced increase in pay. All right, now let's talk about the other side of this. This whole thing of should I spend less or try to earn more to balance my numbers so that I do have a 38% overhead, or, that's kind of one of the ideal numbers that floats around. Let's talk about that. First of all, we have a pretty good idea how much you should be producing when we look at your facility, number of operatories, amount of hygiene, patient files that are active. We can take a look at that and say, this doctor's underproducing. For example, we'll have a doctor who's full. His or her schedule is jammed full and only producing 80,000 or 70,000 a month. I can tell you the problem, that doctor is going to have an overhead issue because they're underproducing. And that can come from either being slow, they can't sell dentistry, or even worse, they're spending so much time with new patients they can't even produce. They're overwhelmed with new patients. Well, that doesn't happen very often. It can happen, and I have to say we're seeing it more with the pandemic after effects of fewer doctors, more people taking retirement. So when we look at how many operatories there are, we look at how many new patients are coming through. And by the way, the new patients that come today through marketing buy a bit more dentistry because of Google reviews. They got a recommendation basically from the other patients in your practice that like what's going on there. And so even though they weren't referred, they are referred in another sort of way. So in a lot of cases, we're just underproducing. Now, there's another factor. I'm starting to hear doctors tell me things, and it's not always age related, which kind of shocked me, but this idea of work weariness. I'm kind of tired. I'm busy all day. I never see my family during the day. Well, nobody else does, but maybe somebody that does. Work weariness. In other words, the need, as we see it, to bring in an associate doctor. In other words, if you're experiencing work weariness and you feel like you're working extra hard, harder than you should, so you can make the profits you need to live and so forth, that might be a case for learning the tricks of the associate trade, how to make that really pay for you. So things like capacity, number of ops, marketing. Are you marketing successfully? Like you talked about, Wes, case acceptance. Have you got people buying the work? Are they buying it and happy enough to refer somebody, at least, the very least, their own family? And number 4, have you hit your work weariness wall? where you just, yeah, I know I got more operatories. I know I got more hygiene. I could do more, but don't want to. Maybe you want an associate, and you'll net a little less, but you're still growing. The net's growing, and you're getting some time off in the process. So this idea of spend less or earn more, keep in mind that earning more doesn't always mean you working like you're on fire. It can mean other things.
So yeah, when you weigh these two out. So a lot of people always want to know what is the cost, So we talked about the employee cost, the overhead. There's cost for marketing. So a typical practice, that's not really spending a lot in marketing, kind of just they're going to be at 1 or 2%. A practice that's really trying to grow a little bit, but maybe not super aggressive, is going to be around 3 or 4%. A super aggressive practice can spend 5% of their gross in marketing. Those are what we see all the time. That's kind of the range. Some offices spend nothing. I get that. The other thing that everybody wants to know about is labs and supplies. So what I would do in your practice is add those two numbers together, and you should get a number somewhere around 15%. And when I say around 15%, I mean like 15 or 16%, 14%, not 18 or 19. That's a little too high. And of course, we have doctors that are way below that. But if you're right at that 15%, you're kind of in line with what we would expect. Like Greg said, the big thing that moves the needle in all practices that call us, that are worried about their overhead, when we look at everything, a lot of it's just they're underproducing with their patient flow. In other words, you've got 2 columns of hygiene, this many new patients, these many active files, and you're producing 20% less than you should. It's going to cause an overhead problem, because you're going to have the facility to see them all. You're going to have the employees to process them all, and missing that last 20% is that's the net, and that's where it goes. It causes all kinds of overhead problems when we underproduce.
If you can't fix this.
Yeah, nearly everybody that calls us with an overhead problem, this is what it is.
And if you can't fix it, you're in a situation because you're on a fast-moving train. Your staff are going to want more money next year, this year, the next time they talk to a friend who's getting a lot more money. In other words, if you're going to be in this game, you got to be in the growth game.
The other thing I will comment on, Greg, is offices that have an abnormal amount of write-offs. Common practices that we work with are going to be in network. And so a lot of these numbers we're throwing out are in network offices, and they'll be writing off 20%, 25%. When you're starting to write off 50%, 40% of your of what you're producing, that can be its own problem, obviously. So
sure. Look at another issue, Wes. You go into a doctor in their 50s or 60s and talk about an associate. It's shamefully common to hear them say, well, I'm not even really busy, And a lot of times when we look into that, it's like they stayed out of network the whole time, and now they're like breathing through a soda straw. They're dying, and because they don't know how to deliver an extreme level of consumerism, how to make people happy enough to finally fork over that extra 10% or whatever it's going to be. And so they're having fewer and fewer patients, when in fact, at that age, they need more and more and more, so they can bring in associates, slow down, see the practice stabilize. And so that's probably the most common pushback I see when we say it's about time for you to try to figure out how to get a life. Some of them say, well, I can't even stay busy. It's a well-kept secret here that I'm only busy about half the time or whatever. They've stayed out of network and starved themselves to death.
Sometimes that's true. I would say most of the time when we dive in, it's not really true. They are busy. They might be 90% utilized. When you track how much time is really spent dealing with patients going from room to room. But I would say very rarely is a practice run so efficiently that there is no low-hanging fruit that we can't exploit by bringing on an associate and plugging in a few different systems, tweaking the marketing a little bit, driving a little bit of patient flow up that way, to get an associate in there for 2 days a week. It's almost to say and to throw up your arms, hey, I'm not even busy. No, we can change that picture real quick. Doctor's busy in 90 days. So
It's not always that they say they're not busy. They just seem incredibly certain they're not busy enough for another mouth to feed, another doctor.
and yeah,
Right.
that could be. In other words, trying to hire a full-time doctor, that could be, but hiring a doctor 2 days a week, virtually everybody can ramp up enough pretty quickly to do that.
People hearing this, something I would just suggest to you. You're too close to your own situation. When Wes and I come into the picture, we can see clearly whether you need to cut costs or raise your revenue, increase your revenues, raise your prices, raise your staff costs, lower your staff costs. It's pretty hard to do when you're in it, because one of the things that happens here, well, I could never cut her pay because she's been here so long, or I could never ask more of this person because whatever, there's so many things that go on. A profit evaluation, you either need to do it or you need to have us do it and decide, do I need to hit the gas? Will producing more solve my problem? Because it won't always, sometimes it will. Or do I need to just get tough and cut all my costs? What normally happens when we cut costs? Yeah, we might lower our cost by 15% and lower our revenue by 30 or 40% if you're not careful.
Right. Yeah, if you want a profit evaluation, we will send out a link with this that you can sign up and talk with Greg and myself, and we will provide us with your statistics, and we'll comb through your practice a little bit, and we'll tell you exactly where you need to be and how to get there, more importantly, the things you need to do and change.
One of the things too we're running into a lot is this thing I talked about, work weariness. It comes on a doctor, it can come on them so slowly, they don't even know that they're no longer welcoming growth. They're sending out all kind of messages, secretly, so to speak, to staff, et cetera, that they're just not open for the challenge they were before. Let me give you an example. When a person isn't suffering from advanced work weariness, they'll be with a patient and maybe they have to do something nice for them, help them somehow, where they're not immediately paid like they would like to be, but they're kind of in it for the long game. When a doctor is just feeling exhausted and wow, this just isn't paying me, I don't even like dentistry anymore, there's not enough in it for me. When they start to feel that way, it can come on them so slowly they don't even know it's happened. In fact, it's almost embarrassing when we bring an associate into that situation, maybe not even a great associate, just a nice, capable, warm body associate. And staff are so thrilled that all of a sudden they're not getting pushback on same day or pushback on treatment or staying a bit late or whatever. So take this broadcast that Wes and I are giving you, take it to heart. What do I need to be doing now? It doesn't always mean you need to get back into harness and pull till you drop dead. It might mean you need to get something set up for yourself, kind of like a retirement plan, but not with money, but with the setup you're living in and you're working through. We can do both of those.
Yes, thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you.